Y, okay, I was just going to say that we're taping these meetings, estamos grabando estas reuniones, así que de acuerdo a lo que ya se les informó, vamos a estar teniendo esa posibilidad de grabar para que nos quede un registro. I think that in the audience, there's people whose first language is English. So in attention to that, as I said, we'll be switching. Please, for all of us, let's be patient because we'll be doing our sessions, this session in particular, across languages. Vamos a estar cambiando del inglés al castellano como nos haga falta porque hay personas que hablan solo inglés, personas solo castellano, y personas que hablan varios idiomas, como ya lo dije al principio, así que, bueno, en atención de eso, vamos a tomarnos esa libertad. Is there anybody who would like to say anything before we get started? ¿Alguien quiere decir algo antes de comenzar? Acknowledgements or something that we'd like to share prior to getting into the content of this session? Si alguien quiere decir algo antes de comenzar, alguna bienvenida o agradecimiento. Alison, would you like to do that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Parece que conozco a todos. Hi, Marilyn. Hi, David. Great to see you.
Hi, Alison.
Hello. Hola, Daniel. Hola, Alejandra. Sí, we are. I don't know, Ignacio, if you think we should wait a few more minutes to allow more people if to get in. But thank you everyone for joining us today. We're spread out all over the Americas, so we look forward to giving you a little bit of a context on the work that we've been doing jointly with the Community Economies Research Network members, and Ana will take us into that introduction. Thank you.
Gracias. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so you're seeing my screen, I gather. Right. Entonces, nuevamente les damos la bienvenida y lo que queríamos hacer en la sesión de hoy es contarles cómo fue el proceso de creación de la Regional Latinoamérica dentro del contexto de la Red Internacional de Investigación y Trabajo con Economías Comunitarias y Diversas. So what I will be speaking about is very briefly providing you the historical context as to how we set up this regional within the larger network of community economies research on diverse economies. And I think it'd be interesting if when we go along and later in the discussion time, if we can spell out our notions about what community economies is and diverse economies are, because this is somewhat the core concept that we've been discussing in general terms, not only in our network, but across the whole network. I mean to say not only in our regional, but in the whole network. Entonces, siendo ese concepto de las economías comunitarias y la diversidad económica un concepto central, sería importante quizás en nuestro intercambio más adelante retomarlo. Simplemente yo ahora voy a hacer alguna puntualización de algunos momentos históricos para la creación de la regional. En el 2015 aproximadamente, después de haber tomado contacto en mi caso con la red, tuve la oportunidad de comenzar a relacionarme con algunas personas que estaban en la red internacional cuya lengua materna era el castellano y o estaban haciendo trabajo en América Latina sin ser nativos parlantes de la región ni hablar castellano como primera lengua. So in 2015, once I had gotten into the international network, I started to be aware of people whose first language either was Spanish or were doing work within the Latin American region or in Spanish in different contexts, such as Spain or Catalonia, for example. And out of that interest in understanding how the framework of the community economies and diverse economies was being used in these contexts where Spanish was the language spoken, I started to network with very few people at that point. Entonces éramos muy poquitos los que estábamos en conversación. Pero lo que sí se registró en ese momento era que había un interés específico de tratar de comprender cómo estos conceptos o bien se traducían al castellano o a otras lenguas que se usan en América Latina, si acaso es así, o también cómo otras teorías que son propias de nuestros contextos estaban en relación con la teoría de las economías comunitarias. So another topic of interest at that point was whether some of the theories that are being built and are known in Latin America could inform the community economies perspective, and if so, in which way? So that was part of the big theme and dialogue at that point. So at that point, and I'm talking in 2015, more or less, we started what I'm calling here building the blocks. So we started to share notions, nociones comunes, and we started to also communicating amongst ourselves as to how the methodologies that community economies bring along could be used in our regions and how so. Entonces algo interesante en ese punto con las poquitas personas que interactuábamos en ese momento, que fundamentalmente eran, por ejemplo, Erin Araujo, Juliana Flores, Antonia Casellas, Tom Smith, que si bien no es nativo de América Latina, ha trabajado en contextos con el uso de idioma castellano o problemáticas latinoamericanas. Lo que nos empezamos a dar cuenta eran dos cuestiones. Una, que había nociones compartidas y comunes y otras no compartidas. Some of the notions were not necessarily shared amongst us, the people who were networking at that point. So we made it a point to spell them out. Y también nos pusimos a ver que la metodología de las economías comunitarias, que ahora voy a distinguir solamente algunos aspectos, como los inventarios, la descripción densa y los diálogos interculturales y locales, desde lo local a otros contextos, digamos, cómo esa perspectiva metodológica se relacionaba o no con nuestro trabajo y de qué manera podíamos hacer como una especie de polinización, pollination across perspectives and languages and frameworks. So what I'm trying to say here is that at that point, we realized that we did share, the people who were interacting in this regional, some notions that were common to all of us, but some notions were not common to all of us due to our different backgrounds, e.g. disciplinary backgrounds, say anthropology or sociology or geography, but also because Latin America is a very diverse region. And even though because of colonization history, we all share quote unquote Spanish as our first language, there's also a very rich and diverse perspective that is built in many other different languages as well. And for that matter, for example, just recently we have been discussing the concept of buen vivir, living well together, roughly translated, and we started to realize that even though that could be taken as a general concept that goes across the nations in America Latina, we also realized that the way that concept is spoken about and conceptualized in different parts of America Latina is quite different as well. So that was just by way of example. I'm rushing a little bit here just to give time to other presenters and to have time to discuss later. Voy a hablar un poquitito rápido, simplemente en atención del tiempo, y lo que les estoy mostrando es que hubo varios años en donde estábamos simplemente construyendo lo que llamé el piso, para que después en años posteriores se pudiera empezar a conformar la red como la conocemos hoy en Latinoamérica. What I'm talking about here is that it took several years to build up the ground, because as I said before, we were very few people at the first moment who were interacting amongst ourselves. And very slowly, but very firmly, people who are interested in either topics related to America Latina or are based in America Latina started to network and conform the regional as we know it now. So as we know it now, I may say that the regional started between 2018 and 2019. La regional como la conocemos ahora tuvo su punto de inflexión y comienzo entre 2018 y 2019. Y ahí podemos decir que también comenzó un momento de transformaciones, porque se estabilizó la red como tal, digamos la regional como tal, se configuró un sistema de coordinación y se empezó a pensar en ejes temáticos anuales. So between 2018 and 2019, what started to happen was that the regional, as we know it now, built a structure that is composed of a general coordination, to which later the other speakers will talk about. And also we started to identify themes that we wanted to work with during a whole year, a whole calendar year. So our work goes usually from February to December, and we select a topic each year and we try to deepen into that topic. So what I'm saying, lo que estoy diciendo es que a partir del 2019, digamos, como consolidamos esta forma de coordinación y de encuentros periódicos anuales donde seleccionamos un tema. Aproximadamente de ser 2 o 3 que conversábamos, más o menos activos inscriptos en la regional hay unas 30 personas, pero también algo muy importante es que damos cabida a personas que no están anotadas formalmente en la regional, pero participan de nuestros encuentros. A very special characteristic of our region is that we are around 30 people who interact now, from 2 to 3. In 2015, we are now almost 30, I think. But what's interesting too is that we keep our meetings open. So if people who do not belong, quote unquote, formally to the network would like to participate, they're welcome to do so. And we have been inviting people in this manner, and that has been very, very productive. So what we do when we meet is we coordinate our efforts to think out loud, tomamos también decisiones, elaboramos ideas en voz alta y proyectamos, pensamos ideas hacia adelante, siempre teniendo en mente que es importante dejar preguntas formuladas. So when we meet, and we meet monthly, what we do is coordinate our efforts to make and take decisions together about the themes or the topics we are exploring. We elaborate together and we project, we plan ahead to make our themes span across time. For example, this year's theme has been against all forms of oppression. And later on, the other speakers will explain a little bit more about that. But that's an example of something we took our time to think about. Why would that be an important topic to exchange about in our region, and how to make decisions about how to implement that topic in our meetings, and what kinds of methodologies would we like to use to delve into that. So in ending, para terminar, lo que voy a decir solamente es que algo que nos viene ocupando y nos continúa ocupando, y con esto voy a pasar mi palabra al next speaker, que va a dar detalles sobre esto, es el tema de qué se define propiamente como América Latina. Is there such an entity? ¿Hay una entidad como América Latina? O eso es una noción que en algunos contextos puede servir y en otros no. En ese sentido, deberíamos tal vez posicionarnos en usar esa noción para algunos propósitos y determinar cuáles son y por qué, y sin embargo para otros propósitos quizás deconstruir dicha noción y ponernos a pensar acerca de esa particularidad regional. So in closing, what I'm saying is that part of what we've been doing and is important to us is to, at the same time, that we keep our notion that is sort of our identity concept, so to speak, which is America Latina, that for certain purposes and in certain contexts is not only a useful concept, but a concept that is an identity concept. So in that sense, it may be good to still keep it. At the same time, we are posing the question as to why wouldn't that concept be appropriate, in which context would not be appropriate to use that term, and why. So that's my piece. I hope I was clear enough in both languages so people could follow me. Espero que haber sido clara para ir y volver en los idiomas, como para mantener a toda la audiencia, digamos, engaged. Gracias, paso palabra.
Bueno, gracias, Ana. Thank you, Ana. I am now going to speak in English mostly, if that is okay. If it's not okay, please let me know and I will intersperse Spanish. I'm going to speak about, taking off from what Ana said. Oops, I stopped it rather than, give me a second. I'm going to speak about, I'm going to eventually get to the issue of Latin America, but I'm going to speak about also the issue of being a Latin American and what that means. And I'm going to start from there. I'm going to start from the learnings and inspirations that I've drawn from the CERN LA Regional, for the Regional that Ana was speaking about, for an activist researcher that I hopefully am and consider myself to be, and for acompañamiento, that is accompanying the groups that I research and hopefully work with. This is my intention. So insider or outsider or in between, does it matter, and why should it? This is very much where I find myself. I am an Argentine. I was born in Argentina. I have Italian parents, Greater Buenos Aires, immigrated to Canada when I was 5, grew up in Canada, Argentina at home, Canada outside. And then my grandparents were Italian. So they came to Canada and co-lived with us. And so there were 3 languages happening, only that 4, because it was Italian dialect in my household. So that is my emergence, that's my growing up. And I eventually decided to go back to my roots and look at the working class in Argentina, which is where my father and grandfather worked. And I've been researching and working with groups in Latin America ever since, and have found a home in many ways in the CERN LA Regional, because we're all kind of this hybridity. And this is kind of what I want to speak to today. These are reflections on my own experiences and what I've learned as a researcher, as an academic, and what I've learned from the Regional. So what I'll quickly go over today, what have I done, and who am I? This insider-outsider issue, problematizing the notion of Latin America. So going from my micro experience to a macro problem, I guess we can say, or a macro tension. And then a case in point in work that I've been doing with Ana on organizing in Latin America, as an example of the type of work that is done and emerges in our network. In those that, this is certainly not representative, but it's just one project of many, just to give you a flavor. And I'll quickly, I won't be able to get into specifics there, but I'll quickly go over that. So I've done work with Argentina's empresas recuperadas, working class workers taking over workplaces and converting them to cooperatives. The book is called Worker Self-Management in Argentina. It was published in 2020. It's gotten some good reception, good reviews, I'm happy to say. And for me, it was about personally going back into my working class roots. That's what inspired me, but also the inspiring stories of workers taking over workplaces and converting them to co-ops amongst many odds, and amongst the neoliberal temporary collapse of the Argentine political economy. For me, it showed that workers and working people can take matters into their own hands and recreate their reality. So this is what I try to do in this book, and I really, from the voices of the workers, I'm theorizing the notion of autogestión, self-management, which is a concept that emerges from the working class in Argentina. They use it themselves to describe their projects. So that's one example. it primarily used at the time, because I wasn't involved in the CERN Regional or the CERN network, a critical theoretical approach. I've also been working with the notion of the new cooperativism. I've done work in Cuba, and I've looked at different, collectively with other co-authors, different experiences of cooperativism in Latin America. Again, I wasn't problematizing, I hadn't been problematizing Latin America as a concept at this time. So really until I started doing work with the CERN Regional, did I become aware of the issue of Latin America. So is there a cooperativism? Is there a cooperative form of coming together that's unique or that we can see across the region? And I argue in this work that I've been doing, the new cooperativism, this concept, I've published several articles. I've done a collected edition in a journal, and there's a new collected edition coming out of people that have been inspired by this concept. So I'm thrilled about that. And I have found common struggles and common themes, but now I'm even questioning some of these assumptions, perhaps. But there is common notions of struggling against colonialism, neocolonialism, and now the new version of neocolonialism, which is neoliberalism. And there are common experiments and experiences and reactions and responses to this across Latin America in a form of cooperativism that is about building solidarity across differences. So ultimately what this is about. Who I am, I'm a multiplicity of things. I've already described who I am. And yet at the same time, I find myself in Argentina proper being an outsider, and then sometimes being an insider. Being from Argentina, it opened up spaces for me. I could understand concepts and things that were spoken of in shop floors that perhaps a non-Argentine couldn't have understood. So at the same time, the workers considered me el argentino, el chico canadiense, right? This is how they would consider me. So that would put me on the outside too. So anyway, I'm a multiplicity of things. What I've learned through the network is to move from critical theory, that's a European-centric approach that I had been using, to a diverse economies approach, to local knowledges, to an approach that I would call a hybridity. The sociology of absences and presences or emergences within and beyond crisis, of rebellion and creativity. So this dialectic move that we learn from European critical theory, we can also see in different expressions in Latin America, but approach that from different ways. And what the community economies approach has taught me is how to hold back, how to let those that we work with speak as well. And so J.K. Gibson Graham speak of weak theory, for example. Not weak that it's not useful, but weak that it rests and it waits until further emergencies happen, that it's open to other possibilities, open to change. Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls it a rearguard theory, right? It's not a vanguardist theory. It's not this universalizing theory, but it holds back. It holds back and listens rather than telling, right? So Anna and I have been increasingly conceptualizing this as an emergent theory. And this is what we have drawn from the approach that we've taken with organizational solidarity in practice, which I will conclude with. But let me just go now macro now. So you've learned about my insider, outsider, in between spaces, but conceptualizing Latin America. The notion of Latin America itself is a problematic one, but what else can we use to describe this region? This is the conundrum that all of us that research do work in and are from Latin America, and find connections with those, like between those from Mexico and Argentina or Chile and Brazil, and yet at the same time know that we're full of differences. Common emergences in those of us that are from and do work in Latin America are how colonialism, neocolonialism, Eurocentrism notions have impacted and shaped the region in various ways. How emancipation, liberation have been taken up. And then notions of autodeterminación and autogestión or self-determination, how they've been taken up in different places. These words have been used in different places, but have been expressed and taken up in different ways. So America Latina is signified differently according to who uses the term, when and how, for what, in speaking to whom, and to stress what. So those that would at once, in one occasion, be against the notion of Latin America as an all-encompassing term to describe this region will use it at the same time, exactly to build bridges with others that are struggling in the region. So that's what we discover. So various names that have been used for the region historically: America Hispana, Hispanoamérica, Hispano y Lusoamérica, Iberoamérica, América Negra, and then Walmapu, Sujus, indigenous terms for example, in North America, Turtle Island, what they would be considered Turtle Island, for this land that we share, but that's so vast and diverse. And then commonalities, common notions, common struggles and experiences. Are there common struggles and oppressions? There are, but they're different. They're rooted and ensconced in difference too. Are there common practices and experiences? How much of something is common across what distances? And what is it that makes it common? And what can we call a territory? How small or large can it be? How much can we find similarities and differences in those ways of conceptualizing the space that we cohabitate? And then how do you translate experience and struggle? And then finally, so with problematizing this, can we use Latin America as a shorthand and placeholder? And what are the consequences of doing so in conducting research, activist research, or co-organizing or co-creation in these spaces? I'm not going to get into this in detail, but Anna and I have been writing about this in what we call organizational solidarity in practice. In fact, the very notion of organizing an organization with indigenous groups, for example, might be foreign. And so these are concepts that have been brought from Europe, but at the same time have been taken up by the very indigenous groups or local groups, perhaps in various ways. So how do we handle this? How do we move through this? How do we write about this? How do we articulate these experiences? And these are some of the concepts that we've been working with, and I'll end it here. The similarities that Anna and I and others have been finding, and what Anna and I have been kind of conceptualizing, trying to articulate, is that these organizational practices, organizational solidarity in practice that we see across different groups practicing resistance, coalitions of resistance and creativity, are that they arise within common experiences of a neoliberal context, neoliberal imposition that has echoes of neocolonial impositions. Drawing from collective memories of the past, from indigenous peoples, we learned that collective memories, not only of the past, but of the past, present, and future held together at the same time. And then enabling autogestión, horizontality, self-management, horizontal ways of organizing, and then coalitional possibilities. So these are some emergent theories that Anna and I have been working with that emerges from the collective endeavors that we've been engaging with in the CERN Regional. I hope it was a useful intervention and kind of a flavor, gives you a flavor of what some of us are working through and struggling with collectively together in the Regional. So thanks. Alison?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, Anna. It has been a pleasure working with you two since Ignacio and I joined the CERNLA network in 2019. For those of you who don't know me, although I think everyone here knows me, I don't know, but my name is Alison Guzman. I was born in Austin to parents of Tejano and Paraguayan roots. I grew up overseas in Latin America and Africa, Southern Africa, and developed an interest in cultures in Latin America as a region, and specifically First Nations and creating solutions for our planet, which led me also to earning my master's degree in the School of International Service at American University in Washington, DC. But after an early career in international organizations, since 2013, I have been based in southern Chile, jointly with my partner Ignacio Krell, who's here with us, working with Mapuche communities in the coastal Lake Budi region on designing tools for regenerative economies. In 2020, we became members of the Community Economies Institute. And this year, jointly with Daniel Carrasco, who's also here with us, we formed the CERNLA team of coordinators for the cycle 2021-2022. So I'm actually speaking on behalf of Ignacio and Daniel today as part of the coordinating team. And on Thursday, there will be a fuller presentation on what we've been dialoguing with the CERNLA members. In 2020, Ana and Marcelo shared a survey with the members of the CERNLA network on some of the topics that they wanted to discuss this cycle. And the concept that came up was against all forms of oppression, or contra todas formas de opresión, which was already a topic that the Community Economies Institute as a whole was exploring, as well as through the equity and justice theme. And of course, relevant topics for our healing planet today. The survey results show that this was a topic that interested the CERNLA members and challenged them at the same time. And so as the part of the coordinating team, we began the challenging process of facilitating this collective exploration on the relationship between oppression and community economies through the work linked through the members that throughout Latin America. So we wanted to understand this better, but as you know, oppression is a very sensitive topic, but we wanted to debate this in a very productive way since it was so overwhelming. And as you may have gathered, discussing such sensitive and complex topics such as oppression in a community economies environment led to the reflection that, of course, oppression in the so-called global north is different from the connotation of oppression in the so-called global south. And so as part of this reflection, we decided to explore this a little bit further with the rest of the members who could attend and understand better how these regional specificities of oppression could be better articulated. So this map, for example, that was pulled out by Daniel Carrasco reflects the social outbreaks occurring in 2019 in Latin America. Let's give you a few more seconds here and switch over. And here's a map where the CERNLA members are located in Latin America. So this search for analyzing the context of oppression in the region resulted in a very productive conversation within the context of community economies frameworks. And in this trajectory, we ended up coming up with 4 key, quote unquote, creative tensions, as we ended up calling it. And these 4 points, which I will describe soon, helped us guide the conversations and dialogue with a focus on reflecting the field cases of community economies that was happening in the land, in the territories, and focus on proposals and solutions-oriented approaches as opposed to the abyss and the grievances of oppression, which is also important, but we needed to have some form of framework to advance in a propositive conversation. So seen here are the cases that presented this cycle. As Ana mentioned, we meet monthly, and in total, so far, 10 community economy cases were presented by 7 CERNLA members who are listed there. These cases stem from the concrete community economies in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, and Uruguay up until now. 5 took place in rural territories, 2 in urban settings, 3 at the national levels. 3 of these cases were linked to conflict-prone regions, 1 of which touched mainly upon indigenous self-determination, that was ours, and at least 3 were directly linked to community or public lands defense or redistribution. Several referred to ancestral newer ways of commoning, and 1 case touched directly upon struggles around food sovereignty. And almost all of these cases presented long-term national political struggles. All were entwined within interfaces with government and markets at different scales, while looking at broadening spaces for autonomy, horizontal co-management, and community decision-making. All of them were led by specific agents in most cases, These were supported by a range of geographic and ideological neighbors, quote unquote, including Earth Others, which is a concept that's also being used in the CERNLA network, Earth Others, which means those that are non-human that we also coexist with, and that we are also speaking on their behalf in this new healing planet. So please know that these are preliminary discussions and debates, and as the map clearly shows, does not represent the whole of community economies in the Latin American region as a whole, but it has been interesting to explore how to keep developing this approach. So in the following, I'm going to present quickly the 4 creative tension points. So this first one that resulted in our conversation is hard domination versus bland domination and their effects. Which refers to the kind of domination or oppression that is being imposed on the specific community economy agent. Is it an acute point of tension from, say, a corporate entity or even a government entity? Or is it more of a progressive level of domination accrued over the years, such as the imposition on the use of pesticides on farmlands, or maybe other forms of domination that create long-term dependency? The second one that emerged was the involvement or disengagement with power structures. Is it connected to how is the community involved, or the community economy agent involved with the power structure in order to overcome this oppression? Is it involved with the government, for example, necessary for some cases? Or was there an urgent need to tear away from the power structure and urgently develop an autonomous function? To what extent do these autonomous functions play out in their case? Then there is what Anna mentioned, buen vivir, and then also the redistribution. So again, these are just creative tension points. So in this case, for example, to what extent was focus placed on the redistribution of financial or land resources? And to what extent was it about the creation of life projects and long-term well-being? How are they related to each other? And finally, the fourth creative tension point was the specific actors, or was it there a more of a heterogeneous articulation? So to what extent was the community economy agent to overcome this oppression led by specific actors? And to what extent was there more of a heterogeneous approach against this oppression? So these are the 4 creative tensions that emerged in our dialogues with the members. And so how did we try to articulate this? And this is my last to final slide. So this expression tool we used through Mentimeter, which was, we used this tool in each case as an experiment, really, to help articulate visually this through a 2-dimensional spatial approach, these creative tension points, to identify how best to express particular creative tension points between these terms of access. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like a duality, but it's not really, because we're trying to figure out within that framework which way the community economy lean towards. And so please note that on either end by no means represents opposites or duality, but leaning towards. So for example, in the first creative tension point of dominación blanda or dura, so a hard domination, bland domination, the presenter would best slide the point to where it fit most with their community economy agency and their struggle against that particular oppression. Interestingly, most cases presented their tension in the dominación blanda, bland domination. And so what that means that there was a long-term oppression that created dependency over a longer period of time. Indeed, in several cases, the points in the middle indicate they were multifaceted and interlinked in both ways. And of course, sometimes this expression, this tool that I'm showing here was not necessarily accurate enough to demonstrate the complexities that was going on in the field. So this again is just an experimental approach for a visual record for the 10 cases that were presented in the beginning. And so now we have, questions that emerge from this conversation. Who is talking about this? Which authors have been writing about this? How do we pair community economies in this context, in the Latin American context, from the Gibson-Graham framework? How can we better incorporate more participation into this conversation? We missed a lot of people from the communities that we worked with, and it was hard to, involve them in the conversation due to internet signals, the fact that they were far away. I mean, that's the whole Zoom world is not necessarily for everyone. Are the conceptual and visual methods useful to interpret this framework? And actually on Thursday, we're going to be exploring this further with some of the presenters, if anybody's interested. And could this framework be relevant for practitioners, teachers, youth, mothers? So that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of exploring these creative tension points. And I guess with Marcelo, we were on the same line of we use the same map, but here I'm gonna quote from the artist, Joaquin Torres Garcia. He says, "I have said Escuela del Sur because in reality, our north is the south. There should be no north for us, but rather in opposition to our south. So now we turn the map upside down, and then we already have a fair idea of our position, and not as they want it in the rest of the world. From now on, the tip of America, extending itself, insistently points to the south, our north." Thank you.
Gracias, Alison. Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Marcelo. So we welcome either comments, questions. Son bienvenidos para hacer preguntas, comentarios, pensar en voz alta, even thinking out loud would be good if you wanted to do that. So we open the mic to be shared. Abrimos el micrófono para compartir.
Can I just quickly say that Ignacio and Daniel are here, and so I want to make sure that I didn't miss out on anything. Ignacio or Daniel, if you wanted to complement what I presented on our behalf.
Well, I can not to I think it was an excellent presentation. The three of yours. Thank you very much. I would just add that I think a main drive that we had as a coordination team this year was to basically we really wanted to keep the conversation very close to the practical concerns of these communities, these territories that are actually doing it. So we asked all of our colleagues to think in cases that they were personally bound with, and try to and we proposed this set of categories as in a way as to keep it simple and again very close to looking at the agencies and trajectories of these cases of, as Alison said, of propositive community economies initiatives and methods, and I am very pleased with the fact that I think that we achieved that. We got off a little bit, not to say that it's not important, but you know, from this very heavy methodological and theoretical expositions, and I think we were very effective in, you know, this idea of keeping it again focused on actual working community economies and the challenges they were facing, these tensions, no, that were shaping them in a way. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents, Alison. I don't know, Daniel, if you, Daniel, ¿quieres agregar algo más como parte de nuestro equipo?
Hola, saludo a todos y a todas. Quizás solamente agradecer el espacio en el cual se pone en perspectiva un trabajo ya prolongado, digamos. Me parece que con la exposición de hoy día uno puede ver todos los esfuerzos, el trabajo acumulado que se viene desarrollando desde el 2015 en función de lo que nos contaba Ana. Con Marcelo uno puede ver cómo el concepto de Latinoamérica se vuelve difuso, ¿no? Y de alguna manera las categorías unívocas que nos permitían comprender los fenómenos en un contexto histórico específico, como el de dependencia, como, no sé, incluso el de colonia, hoy día se vuelven un poco más complejos y empiezan a exigir marcos de comprensión que de alguna manera deben nacer de esos espacios que pretenden traducirse, ¿no? Y con el trabajo de Alison me parece que también se cierra bien en lo que hemos estado trabajando en el último año, que de alguna manera tiene que ver con identificar estos escenarios críticos, pero también pensar en posibles horizontes de posibilidad, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que una instancia interesante en la cual uno puede ver como el flujo de trabajo, identificar tensiones relevantes para el trabajo que se nos viene, pero también poner en valor como los rostros, las trayectorias y los actores que de alguna manera le dan vida a esta experiencia en el contexto latinoamericano, que ciertamente deben mostrar algunas disimilitudes respecto a otros escenarios. Así que básicamente agradecer el espacio y muy buena la presentación.
Sorry, I wasn't able to translate it all, but on the chat, you have some of the main themes that Daniel was sharing with us, and we'll take this opportunity to switch back into Spanish to say a couple of things about what Ignacio said, unless, Ignacio, you would like to say it in Spanish.
Yo lo hago brevemente, era
Dale.
simplemente referir a que parte de nuestras intenciones en este ciclo fue mantener la discusión muy apegada, muy cerca de las experiencias y trayectorias concretas de economías comunitarias en los territorios. Y siento que en ese sentido logramos el objetivo. Eso era básicamente.
Gracias. Dobro utro, Nadia. Would you like to take up the word? Yeah, I was seeing you. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello, thank you. I understand Spanish, but I prefer to speak English. Well, thank you. I came late because I got confused about the time. I'm completely hopeless in this. I'm sorry. And I just wanted to say I really like the idea of against all forms of oppression as connecting thought, because I think it also encompasses nature, right? Because I think that the idea of power over nature is something which is not usually connected to these discussions on oppression. And I am glad that you expressed this explicitly. So that is one comment. And then I have a question. You described these two different community economies, and is this sort of accessible somewhere? Can a person who is not an insider, can I read it somewhere, or is it somehow, because it seems very interesting? So that's all from me.
Yeah, perhaps I can quickly respond to that. Thank you, Nadia, for your observation and very valuable one as well. And actually, that's something that we're expanding as a network, is to understand better this role of Earth others into the conversation of community economies, which is way on the forefront here. But so I don't know if maybe Anna can best provide more insight into this, but so the Community Economies Research Network is based on a framework that was established by Gibson Graham, and they have a network, communityeconomies.org, where you can see basically where these activists, practitioners, community economies who are practicing this economy framework in the field, but also expanding on it. And it's all over there's a map there. And within each case, each one has their own link to their cases or their case studies. With regards to our work in the Latin American region, we're just starting to understand how we're going to be projecting and displaying the community cases that have presented. So far, it's been only through the dialogue, and it's all recorded. But more than that, we haven't really explored how we can gather all these examples of community economy cases in Chile and Uruguay. Hopefully in the near future, we will have our members from Mexico presenting. There's some other members from Brazil. So there's still a lot of work to go, but obviously at this point, we're in such an early explorative phase that we're open to suggestions. A website maybe, at one point was raised, but we're still not sure. It's all kind of exploratory. Maybe Ana or Marcelo, Ignacio, Daniel might have something to add to that.
Just quickly to say that on the chat, I put the link that Alison has just mentioned. And I also put another link to a talk we held, I think it was last year. The speaker was Antonia Casellas Puigdemasa, que is de Catalunya. She's a Catalonian researcher. She's part of the network. She couldn't be here today, but she also works with Daniel. And I think that what I also would like to add is that from knowing Nadia and your work and the sessions that we shared last year, I don't know if you remember, but last year we did say that several of the issues that you face in Eastern Europe are similar to some of the issues we face in some places in America Latina. And for example, this notion that Marcelo shared, and maybe I'll pass the word on to him later after I speak, on this new this neoliberalism perspective imposing in our countries that at the same time seems to be linked back in history to colonial history. And what we mean by colonial in Eastern Europe may be very different than what we mean by colonial in America Latina, but still there's an issue about long historical perspective and short span historical perspective that I think is at play in both regions. So I guess this is an invitation for people who are somewhere else and still they like the approach we're taking and the issues we're discussing to join us whenever they want or can. Estoy simplemente haciendo una invitación y comparando un poco algunos de los tópicos que discutimos el año pasado en Liviana 1, when we met, cuando nos conocimos con Nadia, y parte de lo que ella presentó en una sesión el año pasado y ella y otros colegas nos hizo pensar a varios de nosotros en América Latina que hay algunas similitudes de historia de largo tiempo en Europa del Este con algunas regiones de América Latina, y hoy me parece que se vuelve a poner esto de relieve y es interesante mantener ese foco abierto. So welcome again. Gracias.
Gracias también.
Marcelo, no sé si quieres agregar algo. Alison, Daniel, because I think we're running
out
of time. Sí. Great.
Yeah,
Gracias.
I just put the link for Thursday if you want to see further the cases, Nadia. Thank you.
I think on Thursday I have something else. It's so frustrating, trying to fit this into the schedule.
I know, but good thing is that we're taping everything. Lo que está bueno es que se está grabando todo, and later on,
We are taping, and in parallel, we are also writing. We are in a initial process of writing collectively with all the expositors of the cycle. So about these 4 creative tensions that we are building as an interpretive framework, that we hope to keep developing and adding cases and so on and so forth. We'll see how far we get.
About the tensions, just a small thing. Is there a link between the first and the second? I mean, the hard and soft domination, and then the engagement with power structures.
Mm-hmm.
There is some connection, isn't there?
There is actually that we are figuring out that the soft and hard domination is actually somewhat different than the rest of the points of tension, since it's sort of an external agency, let's say, while the other three are sort of ways of responding to one or the other. But again, this is a sort of a work in progress and is part of an ongoing elaboration. So I don't have a definite answer, but that's what the way we are currently thinking about it as a team.
Yes, well, it can be domination by ideology, right? Or by the progressivist dominant paradigm as well.
Yeah, that's the idea. You have one that has to do more with coercion, if you like, and then the soft one has to do with subjectivation, if you like, within this possibly oppressive cultural patterns, if you like. Anyhow, but it's an ongoing construction. It's an open-ended construction. So
I wanted to also just quickly, I see Jainaba, Wiki and Edo, David, Marilyn, and you all know our work with the Lake Booty community. So I don't know if you had specific questions linked to that specifically. Oh, David, your microphone is off.
I have an observation about the word community based on my own experience in Chile. A long time ago, I was in the Peace Corps in 1964 and 65, working primarily in Santiago in two poblaciones. One was San Bernardo, which was next to the town of San Bernardo, but somewhat distanced from it, and geographically isolated because there were no developments around it except for an Air Force base on one side, which of course was walled off. And the other poblacion I spent a lot of time working in, Jose Maria Caro, was at that point the largest poblacion in Santiago, and had 6 distinct sectors, each of which had, let's say, distinct socioeconomic conditions and populations. Then through our association with Alison and Ignacio, I saw work in a Mapuche community, in a specific Mapuche community, which I thought was as effective as any work I'd seen in community organizing, and in large part because it was so centered on meaningful engagement of the whole population in active participation of the development of various specific projects that they were working on. So my point is that the term community, all of these places were described as communities by, particularly in the 2 poblaciones that I knew well, by the authorities, the state, but also by the people themselves. But the difference between identity and cohesiveness and shared values between the Yaguepuyi community, where Alison and Ignacio work, and the poblacion communities that I lived in and worked in for 2 years, is overwhelming. People in San Bernardo didn't associate as people of the same cultural heritage or background. They were largely people who'd moved to Santiago and to find work or to find a better life, but they didn't necessarily have shared cultural experiences that enabled them to come together as easily as the Yagi-Puyi community can come together. So the term community remains puzzling to me. And I think, again, based on ancient experience in terms of the time that I spent in Chile and the reality of the moment, I don't know whether it's relevant, but it's very concerning to me that community is used with this broad stroke, overarching intellectual conceptualization of, broad issues when there's such an enormous distinction between what communities actually are and how one works effectively in the differences of being able to work effectively in the extremes that I myself have experienced in Latin America.
Actually, that's an interesting point because in the framework of community economies and diverse economies, the actual term community starts as a placeholder to move to a step that in this framework is called the inventory, which means exactly what you're saying, what you're pointing out, which is to ask the question of what's happening here and how are people who are in such or such place defining what they do, who they are, who they interact with. So that is an excellent point that you're bringing, because within this perspective, even though the term is used to signify that there's a lot going on at the local level, the framework also poses the question of, we don't know exactly what is it that is going on, and therefore we should ask. Right, exactly. So I think that's a very important point in this framework, which is not a framework that brings like a top-down model to defining what is a community, but asks. However, it is interesting that you're bringing this point out, because that's exactly something that we've been struggling with in regards to how people name themselves. For example, many times we find groups and places and people who would not use either comunidad or colectivo, or would use either the name they identify with, or, for example, it comes to my mind the work by Joaquín Rothman in Argentina con una población que vive al costado de la ruta. There's a large group of people in Argentina in the province of El Chaco living on the side of the road, and their identity key term is banquinero, which means along the road, right? Yeah, right. And so, yeah, so his presentation brought about a lot of issues of the type you're highlighting. And on an ending note, I would like to add that just very recently, 3 people in the Community Economies larger network, we've been writing a very small piece to be part of a handbook that is going to come out next year, precisely on this definition and the problems that taking up that point of view as sort of an overall concept to speak about very contextually situated nuances brings about. So that's the whole thing that it's, I think you nailed it in a way. You put, yeah. No sé si quienes hablan castellano me pudieron seguir, porque más o menos son cuestiones que venimos conversando, si no, I switch. Okay, yeah, I think we're running out of time, but I'll leave it to the coordinators to decide what to do. I'm going to shut up now.
No, that was a great response, Ana. I just wanted to quickly say what, also echoing a little bit what Marcelo said about finding a home, is that even though the framework of community is very diverse and distinct and different all over the world, really, what we found a commonality was that this group are working in the field and doing the grunt work and in the trenches, co-designing and experimenting and going through the emotional and the time management challenges in order to get to the other side. So with Ignacio, we've suddenly found all these people who have, maybe they're in different contexts with different visions, and I mean visions, but all linked to healing, a healing planet. So we're kind of all in the same side in that way. But it was nice to find, what would you call it? Reference points, and relate to people who are in the trenches, who are actually doing the work, because a lot of people are talking about community economies, but at a very theoretical level, to be frank. It sounds beautiful, it sounds nice, but here we did find people who are actually doing the grunt work and talking to the community members. So that to us was very special, I think. I don't know, Ignacio, if you want to complement that. And by the way, with Ignacio, we're writing a piece on resilience and what that means with a group of colleagues from the CERN member network, from the Mapuche perspective of resilience. So that's also been interesting too. Sí, gracias.
Tal vez Marcelo puede hacer un closing note.
Sure. I'd like to say how similar and different the experiences that we've been talking about are. The similarity, what brings this place, so-called Latin America, together is struggle, I believe. Struggle against European impositions. The latest expression of that can be, and this is the latest iteration of colonialism, is neoliberalism. Latin America has been a test bed for neoliberalism. And it's this new form of capitalism and new form of colonialism, what we can also call neocolonialism, in a more diffuse way. And it has bloody hands, ultimately. So, you know, we often relegate this notion of neoliberalism to economic concepts, political economic textbooks, and such, but these are real experiences and real struggles and real disappearances. We can't forget how bloody the struggle has been. Disappearances in Argentina, disappearances in Chile, disappearances in Venezuela, and on, and the story continues. The constant oppression and keeping down of Haiti, for example. I mean, I can go on and on. And the extractivist nature of capitalism in this region. So lots has been written about this and theorized about this. But also, and this is what's promising, I think, for me, what drives me and what inspires me in doing research here and continuing to work with groups in America Latina, and also to be continuing to work with this group, the CERNLA Regional, and drawing from the concepts that the community economies, diverse economies approach provisions. And that is that there are countless, we can't, yes, inventorizing experiences, experiments in creativity, productive creativity from the grassroots, from below, from indigenous groups, from working people, etc., is part of the method. But it's endless. You can't inventorize anything. The beauty of it is that while capitalism, this form of capitalism in particular, it always has, it's claimed to be totality, it's totalitarian, but it's totalizing, documenting and working with indigenous groups and people that are creating things in local territories and communities, however it's defined, is innumerable. We can never totalize it, and I think that's what's beautiful about it, and that's what drives what should drive our work with these communities, to articulate, to help articulate, and to inspire others as well. What's great about the CERN network more broadly is that people in Australia, we're coming together with people in Australia, working with indigenous groups, people in New Zealand, people in Europe, working with different experiences, asset-based approaches that look at first what's the strength of local communities before proposing and working with alternatives and solutions to problems. This is what's really unique about the work that we're inspired by, and that we're trying to continue. So those are some final thoughts, continuing thoughts for further work. Yeah. So I don't
Me
know.
parece que nos merecemos decir por los compañeros detenidos desaparecidos, presentes ahora y siempre.
Sí.
Ahora y siempre. That's something we usually say on the streets when we march, honoring people who have been killed. So they're present now and forever.
Yeah.
So let's keep up the struggle. Gracias.
Okay. Gracias.
We'll be seeing you.
On
Bye-bye.
Thursday. Bye. Ciao.
Yeah. Ciao, ciao.
Gracias.
Great seeing
ciao.
everyone.
Nice to see you all.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Chao, chao. Gracias.